the management of Brexit since 2016 was a shambles. And it was handled very badly. And what was missing from the entire debate was a frank appreciation of the question, where is the EU going? If we're going to stay in the club, we ought to be confident that we want to go in the same direction as the rest of the EU. The rest of the EU is being driven towards a fiscal and political union as a means of keeping the euro together. That is happening without any legitimacy in terms of support from electorates around Europe. It's led to tremendous conflict between Germany on the one hand and some of the southern countries on another. The problems of the euro have not been resolved. One of the good things about what's happened since Brexit is that when the EU debate these issues, it is not taking the form of the UK versus the rest of the EU with a great wrangle at the summit. The wrangles at the summits are now between Germany and the others. Well,
it might have been good for them, therefore. The question is, has it been good for us so far?
Well, I don't think that we would have wanted to follow down the path which the European Central Bank and the European Commission want to take them, which is towards a fiscal and a political union. And I think it would have led to an even greater debate at home about why should our tax and spending policy in Britain be determined by the rest of Europe. Now, they haven't resolved it themselves in Europe, but that's clearly the direction down which many feel we have to go.
And at a personal level, are you disappointed or pleased with how it's gone?
Well, I think it's been a shambles since 2016. I mean, Parliament unable to decide of which of 8 or 9 versions of Brexit, the failure to negotiate properly. If you rule out no deal, you haven't got any negotiating position at all. And I think that the simple things where what we should have done was to make the pro-European case for Brexit. We could have said after Brexit, all EU residents in the UK will automatically have rights of residence. We didn't have to wait, make it part of a negotiation. We just do it. We say to people from Europe, we're going to get all the machines in Heathrow Airport to work properly. You just come in, put your passport through and walk through. We could have done more, I think, to try to ensure that we had access to education and research opportunities in Europe. The atmosphere that was created in negotiations with Europe turned out to be very bad. There was no need for the atmosphere to be that bad. It clearly wasn't going to be difficult. The Northern Ireland Protocol, the government signed off on something that it turned out they didn't believe in and thought they could just unilaterally change that. Well, I mean, people obviously felt you can't damage the reputation of the UK by signing something and then pretending you didn't do it.
We know who we're talking about.
We know who we're talking about. And I think these things have all proved very damaging. So there's an awful lot of work to be done in preparing relationships. But I think you can see in what Rishi Sunak has already done that a calm approach to this can pay dividends.
I don't want to tempt you into politics, but I do know that Rachel Reeves was your protégé almost inside the Bank of England. I just like your view of her because she's having quite a tough time. She's been called already the Iron Chancellor or the Iron Shadow Chancellor or whatever. She seems very, very determined to be an orthodox figure in number 11.
Well, first of all, she is very talented, very impressive, and highly qualified to play the role of Chancellor. I think the thing that will worry her is that almost all the difficult decisions on public spending and taxes are being deferred until after the next election. So they will fall into, with some probability, her challenge, her entree in the first few weeks. And it will not be something that can be solved quickly. We don't have, I think, a credible framework for fiscal policy at present. The present framework seems to be that if you can say that 5 years from now, then the ratio of national debt to national income will at last be falling, well, that's fine. But when you get to next year, it should be 4 years it's going to be falling, and then 3. Actually, the framework says you keep pushing it off. Keep pushing it back, which means you never end up with a situation in which debt to income falls.
The oddity of the fact that we have bonds where they are today, more or less where they were in the middle of the Liz Truss implosion, and yet everybody's incredibly calm about it, apparently. Why should we be calm about it? Because, after all, the numbers look quite similar.
So one of the things that happened during that episode was that interest rates on gilts, long-term government bonds, went up, exchange rate went down, but also there were proceed. They fired the head of the Treasury. They didn't use the Office for Budget Responsibility to look at their plans. So the way they handled it created a great deal of uncertainty about what would happen. But the fact that interest rates went up and the exchange rate went down in itself was actually what the economy needed. We have in Britain the lowest national saving rate of any country in the G20. Everyone talks about the need for more investment. We do need to invest more. But if you invest more, you've got to finance it. And the only way of doing it is either to borrow from abroad or to save more at home. We already are borrowing a lot of money from abroad with a large trade deficit. We desperately need to raise our domestic saving. That's a big structural issue which governments need to focus on. And what I find a little bit dispiriting at present is that it's quite easy to list 5 or 6 major areas of policy where you need radical reform, new thinking, and yet both major parties seem very close together in terms of their approach to manifestos and economic policy.
So you'd be advocating major reform of pensions, for instance?
Yes, major reform of pensions, looking again at the tax system, thinking about the structure and organisation of the NHS, trying to raise the national saving rate, getting people to understand that if we want to improve public services, rather than cutting taxes, we might even have to raise them. You can't have, pretend that you can just spend lots more money on public services and cut taxes from where we are with a big deficit. There just needs to be a much better informed debate about these things.
And then a bold new direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Going back to
much of it could be bipartisan. Reform of pensions is not obviously something where Labour and the Conservatives would have different views, but it will take more than one period of 5 years in government to do this. I think there is real scope for having more bipartisan approaches.
Do you think we all got a bit hysterical during that Liz Truss moment, that Kwasi Kwarteng moment, when we were all sort of staring at the screens and looking at the ticker tape at the top, and the entire system became very, very aerated?
Yeah, I do think we got a bit hysterical. I think I can understand to some extent why, and that the government appeared to be hell-bent on cutting taxes without any proper analysis or framework, jettisoning the way government was being organised. I understand that. But I don't think the economic consequences were that bad, and frankly, they've gone away. They've disappeared now. So I think that, what we should boast about, really, as a country, is that we had a government that we didn't think was doing very well. It lasted 44 days. We got rid of it, and no one got hurt.
The other thing I don't really understand is how a Prime Minister, with an independent central bank, can make any promises about where inflation's going to be.
Well, that's a good point, and I think it's probably not wise to do so. If you think that the high energy and food prices of last year are going to drop out of the measure of inflation, it's convenient to...
That's sort of out of your control, in a sense. That's something that happens.
It's something that happens, but if you are confident it will happen, it's not a bad thing to claim credit for when it's actually got nothing to do with you at all. I think the real problem that we've seen is that politicians seem to think that increasing growth is something that we should aim to do over 18 months or 2 years, and that doesn't make any sense. What is very important is that, we are bequeathing...
Sorry, I can just stop you on that. It doesn't make any sense because getting the economy sorted out, getting the infrastructure and all the rest of it for real growth takes a lot longer than 18 months.
Yes, any measure to improve the underlying growth of our economy may take 20 years to really come through. Now, it's important that we start it now, because if we don't, it won't never happen. And the reason we need to do it is because we are bequeathing to our grandchildren a very high level of national debt, which they are going to be paying taxes to service that debt. And the least we can do for them is to try to make sure that the economy 20 years down the road is going to be performing better than would otherwise be the case if we didn't try to improve the performance of the economy.